Welcome back for our final week in the Psalms. Our psalm today is a community lament. So it's one in which God's people have come together in a shared petition. They are asking for revival, and their plea is that God turn from his anger and that he turn towards them in favor. Throughout history, there have been times that God's people have come together united in a common need. Their plea, it affects them all, and they know that there is only one who can meet it. We've been united globally in recent weeks because of this COVID-19 pandemic, and we've seen several global movements of prayer. So today, let's turn to this community lament in God's Word, and let's see how those who have gone before us to be examples for us cried out to God at such a time. Psalm 85, revive us again. Lord, you were favorable to your land. You restored the fortunes of Jacob. You forgave the iniquity of your people. You covered all their sin. You withdrew all your wrath. You turned from your hot anger. Restore us again, O God of our salvation, and put away your indignation toward us. Will you be angry with us forever? Will you prolong your anger to all generations? Will you not revive us again, that your people may rejoice in you? Show us your steadfast love, O Lord, and grant us your salvation. Let me hear what God, the Lord, will speak, for he will speak peace to his people, to his saints. But let them not turn back to folly. Surely his salvation is near to those who fear him, that glory may dwell in our land. Steadfast love and faithfulness meet. Righteousness and peace kiss each other. Faithfulness springs up from the ground, and righteousness looks down from the sky. Yes, the Lord will give what is good, and our land will yield its increase. Righteousness will go before him and make his footsteps a way. This psalm begins by looking back. God's people remember a time when they lived apart from God's favor, but then it was returned. And after living without God's blessing, they felt the joy of it restored. They felt wonder at God's delight and pleasure being upon them again. They looked to a time that God carried. That's the word that's translated forgive. In verse 2, it has the implications of carrying. So they look at a time that God carried and covered their sin and withdrew from his wrath and turned from anger towards favor. After looking back, in verse 4, they raise their plea. Do it again. God, you have done it before, and we're asking you, do it again. Restore us again, God of salvation. Put your anger away. They ask boldly, and boldly they remind both God and themselves of the promises that he has made, which secures their asking. God has told them who he is, and so because of that, what he's going to do, how he's going to act. When he was establishing them as a nation, bringing them up out of slavery in Egypt into the land he promised them, he reminded them who he was and what he would do. And their leader, Moses, he asked God, he said, show me your glory. And God said, I'll proclaim my name to you because my name is my glory. My name is who I am, and who I am is what's glorious. And we read in Exodus 34 verses 5 through 7, the Lord, Yahweh, descended in the cloud, and he stood with Moses there and proclaimed the name of the Lord. The Lord passed before Moses and proclaimed, Yahweh, Yahweh, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping steadfast love for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, but who will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children and the children's children to the third and fourth generation. This is what God's people are reminding themselves of in Psalm 85. In his own words, God had said that he wouldn't be angry with them forever. He had said that his mercy, his grace, his patient love, and his faithfulness, they would last for thousands of generations, and his anger only for several. And that's not literal, it's metaphorical. It's intended to make the point that God's undeserved mercy and grace towards us sinners is great. And by comparison, his deserved anger towards us is small. So because of who he is, God's people know what he will do. He will experience righteous anger over sin, but his anger will not be prolonged to all generations. So in verse 8, God's people, they commit to listen, knowing that he will speak, and they commit to active listening. They will search themselves while they wait for him. It's clear in this psalm that even though God's people are enduring a time when his favor is not on them, they still have confidence in this God who isn't pleased with them. And that's because what's happening to them, it's not coming as a surprise to them. They have been told repeatedly that to live under God's blessing, they need to follow him. They need to walk in his ways. When God led them out of Egypt and into their land, he warned them repeatedly, "As my people, turn to me, not to yourselves, for guidance and wisdom and instruction and deliverance and life." One place we can read about this is Deuteronomy 6, verses 29 through 33. And God's people have just promised that they will listen to God. They will obey him. And God says to Moses, "Oh, that my people had a heart like this always, to fear me and to keep all my commandments, that it might go well with them and with their descendants forever. Go and say to them, you shall not turn aside to the right hand or to the left. You shall walk in all the way that the Lord your God has commanded you, that you may live, and that it may go well with you, and that you may live long in the land that you shall possess." And again, when Solomon is dedicating the temple in 1 Kings chapter 8, he prays that when trouble falls because the people sin, if the people turn to God, acknowledging who he is, and they turn away from their sin, he will hear their pleas and he will forgive their sin, and he will teach them the good way that they should walk in. So this community lament, it contains a word of warning or of caution. God turns from his people when they deliberately and consistently turn from him. In verse 8, we read that God will speak peace to his people, but let them not turn back to folly. God's salvation is ready, it's present, it's available to those who fear him, to those who are willing to submit to him and live in obedience to him. And how many times as God's people have we responded to this by groaning, so you mean we've got to follow the rules to have the relationship? If we want God's favor, we have to give up what we want for what he wants? And herein lies the struggle. What do we want more? Him or the freedom to follow our own desires? In verse 6, God's people ask that he revive them again so that they can rejoice in him. In verse 9, we see that they're waiting for God's salvation so that his glory can dwell among them once again. In the past, God had poured out his blessing on his people, and he had done it to draw them into relationship with him. He wanted them to know and to see that every good and perfect gift comes from the Father of light. But what happened time and again is that God's people found they were easily turned away from the giver by his gifts. People wanted the peripheral benefits of being God's people more than they wanted the God who offered himself. Being a parent, I see this a lot. My kids are easily tempted to enjoy the benefits of being part of the family more than the relationships themselves. And Rob and I, we try to paint this picture of what constitutes good living in our family. We share the benefits of them living in harmony with our wishes. And I've done this especially in recent weeks with this whole learning from home situation. I've done the vision cast, like, look kids, we have the opportunity to grow closer together as a family as we pursue health and harmony whilst we're together every hour of every day. And so let's get our work done first while our brains are fresh. And for you, that means schoolwork. For me, it means work. And then let's grow in our creativity and our imagination through reading or maybe a craft. Let's push our bodies through exercise and fresh air. Let's maintain community by doing the chores that keep our space livable. And I communicate the long-term benefits for them of these disciplines. I feel like I'm clear, but they can so easily become seriously misguided. And what I can't understand is how confused they get when I'm a little bit hostile as a result. On their second day of learning from home, we were fresh off the vision cast. I had, clearly laid out expectations. In fact, that very morning, they had all printed out the schoolwork they needed. It was in front of them, and I was like, this is your marching orders. Do this schoolwork. I'm going to go get ready to record a psalm devotional. This is what you do in the meantime. So I come back less than half an hour later, and no word of a lie, all four of them are sprawled out on the couch watching a movie. And I'm like, seriously? Are you kidding me right now? In what world, in what language could purposes and expectations have become this confused in under 30 minutes? And apparently the oldest was supposed to watch a movie and write a review, which meant that the second had to immediately sign out of his online class to join him. And the youngest two, I mean, they were doing high school work instead of elementary work. So how was I not thrilled by this? Though they had ignored what I wanted and done exactly what they wanted, they were surprised that I was annoyed. I explained, I am trying to help you live a better, fuller life in the long term. But they tend to just see me as a killjoy who's taking away their pleasure in the short term. Obviously, mine is an imperfect analogy, but so often heaven and earth are at cross purposes. God is the one who made us, so he's the only one who can know what is best for us in the long term. And sometimes he removes his blessing from us for a time so that we will seek him once again. Psalm 85 ends with this vision of harmony as heaven and earth come together in unity. Heaven's righteousness is met with faithfulness from the earth. God's love and faithful commitment for his people is met by love and faithful commitment from his people. God leads, his footsteps make the way, and his people follow. This week on the church calendar, we remember that time between Jesus coming into Jerusalem and being enthusiastically cheered by a crowd who wanted to crown him as king, and between him being jeered as he walked towards the cross. When that beam was laid on his shoulders, he carried with it the weight of sin. When his robe was stripped off, exposing his nakedness, he endured that shame so that ours could be covered. As he hung in dying agony, his Father turned his back on him in wrath over sin so that he could turn his face towards us in favor and in blessing. On the cross, heaven bent near and kissed the earth in righteousness and faithfulness and love. My prayer for believers during this time of community lament is that we will cry out to God, not simply asking for a return to health or security or ease or prosperity, but that our hearts will cry out to him for more of him, that they will cry out in commitment to turn to him instead of to our own ways, and to follow where his footsteps lead.